Audits are often an infamous term. Just say the words and you're likely to conjure up thoughts of things like IRS audits and the despondency that goes with them. In short, no one really likes to think about audits. However, with UC San Diego receiving over $1 billion a year in research funding, most of which comes from the federal government, there are bound to be some rules and regulations and, some inevitable audits to ensure that our institution is being a good steward of those funds. That's what makes this topic so important. A necessary evil? Sure. Something you don't really want to think about until it happens? Maybe. But as a research administrator, guess who has a direct role and responsibility for the financial compliance of those federal dollars? That's right, you do. But today, I pose the question, do audits always have to be ominous? I'm your host, Nicole Joyce, and welcome back to another episode of the UC San Diego RA Training Program podcast, where we talk about and explore topics relating to research administration. In today's episode, we sit down with Audit and Management Advisory Services, also known as AMAS, to discuss the impacts of audits on the university and your role in them. So let's start by talking with Greg Buchanan. He's a manager for AMAS. And when I sat down to speak with him, I had him tell me a little bit about AMAS and its role at the university and how that relates to sponsored research.
So the mission of AMAS is to monitor the university in its discharge of all of its oversight responsibilities, governance processes, internal control systems, compliance with laws, regulations, policies, ethical conduct. We achieve our mission by creating an audit plan every year and carrying out planned audits. We also do supplemental audits. We also do external audit coordination. Not all of our audits have a research component, but given that we have almost $1 billion in research every year, many of our audit projects have at least some research component to it. For example, on our upcoming audit plan, we have a few different departmental audits at the general campus and SIO. And depending on the research portfolio in each one of those departments, it's likely that we're going to test research at some level. Our fiscal year 17-18 audit plan also includes a review of award closeout processes to identify if there's any room for improvement when awards are being closed out. Over the last couple years, we also evaluated sponsored research processes such as subrecipient monitoring, cash draws, and effort reporting. But aside from all those planned audits, probably our most significant involvement in sponsored research over the past few years is through coordinating external audits. Per policy, Audit and Management Advisory Services has a responsibility for coordinating any external audits or reviews that are conducted by outside agencies, with the exception of our annual financial audit that's conducted through PwC. Over the past few years, we've had two very large external audits. The Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General conducted a review of administrative expenses. That was completed a few years ago. The National Science Foundation Office of the Inspector General just completed their audit a few months ago. With external audit coordination, we are responsible for compiling all the requested documentation, responding to questions, and responding to question costs identified by the auditors. We do planned audits, supplemental audits. We also do external audit coordination. So it all depends on what the type of audit we're doing and the department that we're auditing.
What Greg is saying is that AMAS is responsible for the coordination of both internal audits. Those are the ones we conduct on ourselves to make sure our internal controls pass the smell test, so to speak, and external audits, which are conducted by outside entities. They also work with investigations, which differs from audits. So I asked Greg to clarify and further explain the distinction.
So internal audits are initiated based on our audit plan or the request of management. An internal audit is an open process. We work with the department to identify what our scope is going to be. We get input from the department on what we should be testing. They help us identify risks and whatnot. Investigations are initiated because of a concern of an improper governmental act, such as fraud, waste, or abuse. Investigations are not nearly as transparent. With an investigation, management is not normally notified that there is an allegation and that there's an investigation that's going to be taking place. Rather, the investigator uses discrete methods to gather information and conducts interviews in a discrete manner. So it's just not as open of a process. So external funding agencies such as NSF, they also conduct investigations. So whenever we get those, our involvement as external audit coordinators is usually a lot less. So we're not normally informed of exactly what the auditors are looking at or interviews that they're conducting. So it's a lot harder to control.
So basically, the key takeaways are:
audits are an open process. We're very forthright about what we're testing. And investigations, it's a little bit more discreet. And we're not always going to let management know. And there's a really good reason that we do this. It's because we want to preserve documentation. We don't want management going in and cleaning things up. We don't want them coaching interviewees. So those are the kind of things that we have to be concerned about. And if a funding agency such as NSF was going to conduct their investigation, they'd do the same thing. It would just be discreet, and it would be to preserve documentation, prevent coaching of witnesses, things like that.
No one heading to the shredder.
Right, exactly. We don't want people, going and shredding all their documentation or fixing their documentation to make it look right, things like that.
People with whiteout. Does whiteout even still exist?
Right, exactly.
Okay. You might not be aware of this, but Greg also happens to be one of our instructors for the RA training program. And about every time I see him, I tell him that he is seriously the friendliest auditor I've ever met. And I tell him that if I saw him and his team coming to audit my area, it would make me feel so much better about the whole situation. So that got me thinking. Is it important that people in the department see them as an ally and not just an auditor? And is the relationship between auditors and auditees important? And if so, why?
Auditing and auditor, those terms naturally have negative connotations for a lot of people. Every time that I say that I'm an auditor, they think I'm from the IRS. No one really wants to talk to an IRS auditor, so usually I'm hesitant to tell people that I'm an auditor myself. And the other thing is while most auditors are reasonable, there are some that are unreasonable and will nitpick a department. That's not our style here in AMAS, but those type of auditors, kind of give other auditors a bad reputation. For those reasons, people perceive an audit as an adversarial process, and I don't prefer to think of it that way. I prefer to look at it as a partnership, an opportunity to work with management, improve internal controls, shore up their processes. That's the attitude that I have, and that's the attitude that our department has when we're conducting mostly internal audits. Having that partnership approach rather than an adversarial approach makes for more information sharing. There's much more open dialogue about potential risk areas, better, more constructive discussions about potential audit findings, and an overall better, more constructive audit report. But another benefit to approaching an audit like a partnership is that you build positive relationships with people. And that I find that if you can build those positive relationships, they view us as a trusted partner. And they'll be more willing to share information, concerns that they have with our department in the future. And sometimes we can address those concerns outside of the normal audit process, just kind of as guidance to the department. One thing that I'd like to add is that just being a friendly auditor is not by itself going to help you build those positive relationships. You also have to demonstrate that you're willing to engage in two-way conversations about potential issues. When we go have an audit entrance meeting with the department, we always like to tell them that we have a no surprise audit approach. What this means is that when we identify potential issues, we're talking with management about them before they even go into our audit report. If we surprise audit with an audit report that has findings that we didn't notify them about, I think that kind of hinders our relationship with them. So that's not the approach that we take.
I asked Greg how he viewed his relationship with the departments from an auditor's perspective.
It just opens the communication line a bit more. There's more discussion about the risks that a department faces. They're not afraid to tell us to go look in a certain area or review a certain process because they know that it's broken and they don't want audit findings. So if you have a positive relationship with a department, they're more apt to tell you where they think the problems are and what they think that we should look at. I think that's the main benefit. And of course, just when you're dealing with departments and working out issues, having a partner in a department, it's going to be a lot more constructive in finding ways to overcome any issues or processes that they have.
AMAS was finishing a big audit from a major sponsor, and I wanted to get the scoop on where we were in the process, how we did, were there any findings, or any lessons learned.
You're talking about the National Science Foundation OIG audit that was actually just completed. So that audit is now done. If someone wants to review a copy of the report, it is available. Probably just Google National Science Foundation, OIG, UCSD, and it'll probably come right up. While that audit's complete, our work is not yet done. Right now, the audit is in the resolution stage, so the report's been finalized. It's been handed over to the NSF Audit Resolution Branch. What they're going to do is they're going to do some additional review work, and then they're going to let us know their final determination as to whether or not these are actually going to be disallowed costs that we're going to have to refund to the NSF. So that's the phase that audit is in right now. One of the biggest issues that the auditors identified was related to the timeliness of equipment and supplies purchases. The auditors were very focused on purchases that were made near the end of the award period. For example, if equipment purchases were included in the proposal for a 2-year award, and the purchase for the equipment occurred in the final month of the second year of that award period, the auditors most likely would have questioned that purchase on the basis that it was purchased so late that it couldn't have been used exclusively for the award and couldn't have benefited the award at 100%. So the auditors also questioned a number of computer purchases that were made, especially when they were purchased near the end of the award period. It's easy for auditors to question late computer purchases because, quite frankly, they look like the awardee was just trying to utilize remaining funds rather than making purchases that benefit the award. So my overall advice and lessons learned from this audit, if I had to sum it up, is to be careful when making purchases near the end of the award period. Don't make purchases just because there is leftover money. Ensure that the purchase benefits the award. And if equipment purchases are made near the end of the award and are necessary, be prepared to clearly articulate the benefit to the award, either through documentation or through other means. You might even want to document why the purchase was made so late and or get written approval from the program officer. Also, if any purchase benefits more than one award, then be sure to split fund that. The NSF OIG included a lot of other findings in the report, including unallowable indirect costs, unreasonable travel, and they had some questionable participant support costs. I would recommend reviewing the report to get more detail about those issues, but just keep in mind that the audit resolution process is still underway, and we believe that it's unlikely that UCSD will be asked to refund the entire amount that's being questioned in the NSF OIG audit report. A lot of the costs that the auditors said was unreasonable, we think are reasonable, and we're making our best attempt to argue our point. And we're also continuing to work on ways that we can reach out to the campus community so that there can be more awareness of the issues that the NSF identified.
Next, we spoke with John Mendoza, another super friendly auditor. I think it can be said that people tend to learn from their mistakes, so I had John tell me some of the most avoidable mistakes people make.
In a more general sense, one of the most avoidable mistakes that I see people make is thinking that trust is a control, and it's really not. Having a trusted individual overseeing a particular function will never be the same as having appropriate segregation of duties and strong internal controls. The idea is to reduce risk And one of the most common sense basic tenets that seemingly everyone has heard of is 2 heads are better than 1. And that's pretty much exactly what an organization is trying to accomplish with internal controls. And the truly great organizations strike a balance between being overly controlling and giving agency to their employees. Other mistakes that I've seen people make that are pretty avoidable: not documenting methodology for calculating split-funded expenses at the time of the expense. If these expenses get audited later, you'll have to recreate the calculation, which doesn't always match what was charged to the award. Also, not reconciling expenses in a timely manner. Reconciling expenses on a monthly basis helps ensure they are charged the appropriate award or funding source. And inappropriate expenses should be caught earlier, and cost transfers should be completed in a timely manner. Another pretty avoidable mistake would be not reviewing the account code on expenses. Equipment might be incorrectly coded as supplies and expenses, and IDC or indirect costs would be assessed on the purchase. This would result in overcharging the fund source.
And when asked what key pieces of advice he would give to research administrators, he said,
pretend it's like your own checking account. You would want to reconcile all your expenses in a timely manner so you know how much money's in there. You'd want to know how you came up with allocating, certain costs to this account or that account, and just, I guess, try to, think of it more in terms of, this is your own money. Technically, it is all of our own money. It's all taxpayer money, so it is, we're all part owners of everything here. So the first thing would be feel free to ask questions. If you're ever in doubt of an expense's allowability, allocability, or the reasonableness of an award's expenditures, just know that AMAS is always available as a resource. And if for whatever reason we can't answer your question, we might redirect your question to OPAFs, whose role is to provide guidance on post-award funding uses. In addition, AMAS personnel has experience with accounting, IT, data analysis, Excel, and other Office products, and not to mention a broad range of exposure to various UCSD departments. And this is in addition to the exposure that each individual auditor might have just based on their own career experience. So if you have any questions regarding process improvement in your department, or accounting Excel questions, or if you had any questions or doubts about the efficacy of your department's operations, feel free to bring it up to someone at AMAS and find out what we have to say about it. Auditors have seen how many other similar departments, organizations, and individuals do things, and they might have ideas or approaches that may not have been considered. And in regards to questionable transactions, please advise your PI or business officer initially, then AMAS or OPAFs can provide additional support or resources if necessary. And other pieces of advice include, when responding to external auditor requests for documentation, please consult AMAS first. One of our departmental roles is to act as a liaison or an advocate for the departments that are being audited, and we're supposed to keep track of audits being conducted across campus. Also, I would just like research administrators to remember that audits are a normal part of operations, and it is extremely unlikely that any individual is being singled out for audit. You are not a beautiful and unique snowflake that caught an auditor's attention. It's a normal part of operations.
Finally, I asked him, what should somebody do if they get audited?
What you should not do if you receive an audit notification: don't hang up, don't start shredding massive amounts of paper, don't start deleting gigabytes of data, and please do not get in your car and drive away. What you should do if you ever receive an audit notification from an external organization, please contact AMAS. As we mentioned before, it's our role to be a liaison or advocate for UCSD departments and external audits, so UCSD staff should never have to feel like they have to deal with external auditors on their own. Other relevant information to share with the auditor as well as AMAS that would make everyone's lives easier would probably include if you have any vacations scheduled during the audit, because we would like to plan our schedules around when you're going to be taking vacation, and only in the most rarest of instances would an audit ever prevent you from taking a vacation. It really just does not happen. Also, please share whether or not your department is undergoing any other audits at the same time, and also who or what agency or organization is performing that audit or audits. And we would like to know this information up front just so that we're not repeating requests unnecessarily. And also, please share whether or not there is a way for the auditor to directly access data, via read-only user accounts, of course, or documentation without having to interrupt your day-to-day work. As much as possible, we would like to prevent any kind of disruption to your normal operations, and if we can pull any data or documentation on our own, we would like to do that. Also, if you have any doubts about the appropriateness or efficacy of various accounting or authorization practices in your department, this is probably the time to bring it up. Also, if you don't feel comfortable bringing it up, please consider using the whistleblower hotline available to UCSD staff. That's what it's there for.
And finally, you might be wondering, how does UC San Diego fare when it comes to other institutions? Are we doing a good job or not?
I think we are very good. I think we have very knowledgeable people, and our documentation is very good. I think the way we stack up against other institutions is probably somewhere near the top. Auditors are always going to look for cost to question. And some of the things that they question during the audit, like I said before, we believe are reasonable and I think is really a stretch for them to question. So with that in mind, I think our campus demonstrated that we have really good internal controls.
Although intimidating, after speaking with Greg and John, audits shouldn't be something to fear. As they mentioned, they are an inevitable part of doing business here at the university. But to better prepare yourself and the PIs you support, the answer is simple, but sometimes uncomfortable. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Get the additional clarification, justification, and documentation you need. Because simply put, it's better you ask for the additional explanation than the auditor. And remember, AMAS is here to help and serve as your auditing ally. So reach out to them. Because I think I can speak for Greg and his team when I say they'll be happy to hear from you and ready to help. Thanks for joining us today for the UC San Diego RA Training Program podcast. We'd also like to thank Greg Buchanan and John Mendoza for sitting down to talk with us, and as always, to thank our invaluable training assistant, Francisco Mejia, for his production and editing expertise. Finally, join us next time when we discuss equipment and asset management as it relates to research administrators within the departments. Be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or you can visit our website, trainra.ucsd.edu, where you can find links to our social media, sign up for our listserv, and get more information about the program.